Welcome back to 1834. It's one game all in this fifth match, which is the best of 11 games, not counting draws. Today's guest commentator is Mr. Jack Hackett. Welcome back, Mr. Hackett. Anyway, let's begin. McDonnell opens with e4, we have c5, the Sicilian, and right here McDonnell goes all the way back to his pet opening, which he last played when he won match 2 and hasn't played since. It is, of course, f4. Maybe he's got some new ideas. Knight to c6 now, knight to f3, e6 from the Bourdonnais, c3, d5, and here, as we used to get in match 2, he pushes straight past to e5. f6 from the Bourdonnais now, and at this point McDonnell would have previously played knight to a3 and then tucked it back into c2, but this time he gets his bishop out first, bishop to d3. Meanwhile, the Bourdonnais just keeps playing the same as before, knight to h6. From here he'll clear the queen side for castling, but meanwhile McDonnell just tucks his bishop back into c2 and now bishop to d7, clearing the queen side as we said. Now McDonnell hasn't moved his knight twice like he used to do, so he has time to castle. You might remember he used to like to push h4 and then manually castle, kind of going over the top of the pawn here. But this time he does have time to go for the normal castling. And the Bourdonnais continues with queen to b6 and now d4 into the centre and castling queenside as planned. Now you can see that Le Bourdonnais is on the diagonal here with his king, so he gets out of the way and goes across to h1. Now last time Le Bourdonnais went knight to h5, but the bishop is covering it now, so this time he goes to g4. McDonnell decides to get his queenside pawns rolling and Le Bourdonnais tucks his king further into safety. b4 now, and Le Bourdonnais decides to capture towards the centre and McDonnell responds in kind. Now one idea for Le Bourdonnais at this point might be to bring his rook over to c8 and he'll be on a nice open file, but this time he prefers to complete his development with his bishop. McDonnell continues as well with development, knight to c3, and now the rook comes across to f8. He's hoping that these pawns will get out of the way and he will in fact have a nice open file here closer to the king. We have knight to a4 threatening the queen, so the queen retreats to c7 and McDonnell gets the knight onto c5, which is not really an outpost because it can get kicked by the pawn, but Le Bourdonnais doesn't like it nonetheless. He captures straight away with the bishop and the b pawn captures back, and McDonnell now has a nice semi-open file heading straight towards the king. Le Bourdonnais keeps calm, however, and pushes g5, starting his own attack towards the white king. h3 from McDonnell, attacking the knight, but Le Bourdonnais says, go on then, I just dare you to take it, h5. Now, maybe going on the attack with bishop to a4 here for McDonnell would be good, and then follow it up with rook to b1, but McDonnell prefers to get his king out of the way of this rook and brings it across again to g1. Again, Le Bourdonnais taunts McDonnell. He just captures the pawn here and leaves the knight hanging, saying, go on, I dare you to take it. And McDonnell gives in and he captures it here. It might be a bit of a blunder as it opens up the king side a lot and the pawn's already quite far advanced, so let's see how this turns out. Le Bourdonnais, of course, captures the g-pawn. This is threatening the knight, so McDonnell gets the knight out of there and Le Bourdonnais captures another pawn. Now you can see that this pawn is attacked twice now by the black pawn and the knight, so McDonnell adds a defender to it, whilst also threatening the rook in the far corner. So what does Le Bourdonnais do? He just pushes his g-pawn once more. McDonnell captures the e-pawn and the knight captures back. You can see now that this knight has self-pinned. It can't move without getting the rook captured. However, McDonnell puts his knight back on f3 and this capture comes with check. So after the rook captures, you don't have enough time to capture the rook in the corner and Le Bourdonnais moves it out of the way all the way up to h4. He would clearly love to be able to bring the queen across or the rook across to the h-file and double or even triple up against the king in this way, but McDonnell does have the nice bishop pair guarding the edge squares here, so it is going to be tricky for him. In the meantime, McDonnell plays his queen to d2. Now, Mr. Jack Hackett told me earlier, when he was sober, that this queen move wasn't such a great idea because Le Bourdonnais has e5, and what this does is it blocks the dark square bishop from guarding the corner square. So should you capture the now undefended pawn here, the rook is coming across and you're threatening mate because this square is covered by the pawn. So you're going to have to move the king, and now the bishop is getting in on the action and you're in a whole heap of trouble. However, Le Bourdonnais did not spot this e5 idea and instead captured the undefended c5 pawn, which comes with check. Now, This enables McDonnell to get his dark square bishop on a much better square and threaten the queen, and also point towards the a7 pawn in the corner. Now, perhaps a good idea for Le Bourdonnais is to back off to c8, but instead he goes for queen to e7. As I mentioned a moment ago, the bishop is attacking the pawn in the corner now, so McDonnell doubles up with the queen, threatening all sorts of nasty business. If the black queen had come to c8, maybe the king would have some more defense, but as it is, Le Bourdonnais needs to be extremely careful. He defends by pushing a6, and of course McDonnell brings his back rank rook across to b1, and this pawn is in danger now, because should you capture it, you can't capture back because of this pin. Le Bourdonnais tries blocking with the bishop, but McDonnell just immediately captures it with the rook. And it's about here that Mr. Jack Hackett thinks that Le Bourdonnais realised that he had really messed up. If you look very carefully underneath the comb-over, you can see him starting to sweat a little bit. Because if you capture back with the pawn, you're just going to get checked with the bishop here. There's only one square for the king, or you can block with the queen and just lose your queen. So if you move here, the rook's coming across, it's another check. Similarly, there's not very much for Le Bourdonnais to do. You can come over to d7, but now you're getting checked again. There's one square for the king, and instead of capturing the queen here, you're just going to check with the bishop again. Le Bourdonnais is just going to end up pinning all his pieces. This is another check, you've got to block, and this is finally a checkmate on the back rank. So yeah, Le Bourdonnais realised that he had messed up, and he appears to have gone completely mental at this point and decided to sacrifice both his rooks. His plan appears to be to get the queen up close to the king and try to finish the game this way. Let's see what happens. McDonnell captures the rook. Instead of capturing back, he sends the other rook in to attack the king. And the only move for the king is to capture the rook and go onto the h-file where the queen can attack it again. It's check again, so he moves aside. And again, instead of capturing the bishop, Le Bourdonnais brings his queen right into h2 and gives another check. But will he be able to finish it off, or will he run out of checks? Let's see. The king comes across. It's another check. The king backs off once more. He captures the pawn, and now the king backs off to e1. Now, Mr. Hackett told me earlier, when he was sober, that you can't capture the rook here, because if you do, the bishop's just coming back here and giving a check. Obviously, you can't move here because it's going to be immediate checkmate. So after you try hiding away behind the pawns, the queen comes in anyway. You're getting pushed back to the corner and getting mated this way. So in this position, you cannot capture the rook. The only way for Le Bourdonnais to try to keep the game alive is to keep checking the king. So he tries queen to h1. The king moves up to d2. And here, Le Bourdonnais decides that he's going to capture the bishop. But McDonnell says, is that all you've got? I'm just going to capture your pawn. You can't capture my queen because of the pin, and if you give me one more move, I'm just going to checkmate you in the corner. So what can Le Bourdonnais do now? Well, he just keeps trying to check the king. He comes down to h2, and the king backs off to c1. So what can Le Bourdonnais do from here? Well, Mr. Hackett says the only way to extend the game is to keep checking. So after the king backs off here, the only move is to get the queen into the corner, check down the diagonal, but you're just going to block with the rook. You might want to try to defend the pawn here, but if you do that, the white queen is coming across with a check. You can't move to the corner because this rook is going to deliver the checkmate, so perhaps you want to just block with the queen and give that up to survive a couple more moves. After the capture, the king is coming into the edge of the board and you're getting checkmated this way. Le Bourdonnais saw all of this, so of course, in this position, he gave up and resigned the game. I'm sure he had a few choice French words to say about that. Meanwhile, McDonnell calmly puts on his shades and walks out like the cool cat that he is. He goes up 2-1 in this 5th match. Join me again next time to see what happens next. See you then.